I think I'm good, Lauren. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Oh,
Oh, thank
recording. And to welcome Leslie here, who's going to be presenting, like I said, on training for non-academic careers from resume or from CV to resume. You can please feel free to put your questions in the chat. I'll be moderating, but otherwise I'll turn it over to you, Leslie.
Fantastic. Thank you, Lauren. I appreciate it. And Lauren, just to double check, I have till 1:30, right? I just want to make sure I'm okay with time.
1:15.
1:15. Sorry. Yeah, that's what
Yep.
I meant. So thank you all for attending today and spending your lunch hour with me. I really, really appreciate it. I really hope to make sure that this is a worthwhile presentation for you, and therefore I want to make sure that you feel free to ask questions. And I'd much rather, my presentation style is that I'd much rather answer your questions than get through slides that I've prepared in advance. So even though I've got some things put together in advance that I know that students have questions about, have common questions about, I'm perfectly willing. I'm not sure if something is set up with liberal arts to pass on slides to folks, but I'm perfectly willing to, okay, great, to share those slides later if we don't get through everything. I'd much rather spend the time answering any questions that you might have. That's more important to me. And then, of course, at the end, I'll show you ways that you can reach out to me if you have some questions, because a lot of this is going to be very personalized as well. So there's some big overarching themes that really apply to everyone, some basic pieces that apply to all. But when you really get down to it, a lot of it is going to depend on your specific situation, your educational background, your experience background, and then, of course, the things that you're going to be pursuing, the specific career paths that you're going to be pursuing. Okay, so we've already introduced me, so I will just say that this is a very brand new position to the graduate school. So not just for me, but it is a brand new position because the graduate school recognizes that graduate students are really looking to other career paths than becoming faculty members. And so we really want to make sure that you feel supported. Those of you who are thinking of careers outside of academia feel supported, and that's where my expertise comes in. So today we're going to be looking at ways to identify skills on your CV that might be appropriate for your resume, how you're going to be creating that tailored resume for specific jobs you're looking at, and then again, resources where you can go to get some help. So the very first thing is that you want to be able to, and this is something, if you've ever seen a presentation with me before, you'll see this kind of a slide over and over and over again, because it's important for not just your resume, but really any form of communication that you have with any employer. So knowing yourself, knowing what you bring to the table, understanding, and that might seem kind of silly, like, of course I know myself, but really understanding all that you bring to the table. And some things are going to be more relevant in certain situations than others. Understanding the organization that you're reaching out to, and that might be different. So, you all have very different interests. And so if some of you may be thinking of both, maybe you're thinking of applying to academic jobs and some jobs outside of academia, or maybe you're thinking of applying to for-profit positions and nonprofit positions, or even it could be within the same field. So you could be thinking about two different pharmaceutical companies that you're applying to. And there could still be some differences between those companies or even those positions. And so understanding your audience. And then where do those two things connect? So what do you bring to the table? What are they interested in? And where is that sweet spot? That's what you really have to understand when you're putting your resume together, when you're crafting that resume. So the goal of the resume, and truly, really the CV as well, but the goal of the resume is, I don't want to say never, because you don't want to use those kinds of absolute terms, but the goal of the resume is to get the interview. It's very rarely to get the job. And so it's, especially when you're talking about a resume, which we'll talk about the differences between the resume and the CV. One of the biggest differences is length. And so sometimes it's a struggle to get a shorter document. You all have wonderful things to talk about your experience and your education and all the wonderful things you've done. And so taking shrinking that down, it can be kind of difficult. And so it's sometimes helpful to remember that we're really trying to just get to that next step where hopefully you can go into more depth and detail about what you've got to bring to the table. Oh, thanks, Lauren. I want to make sure that there wasn't a question. And so that's what you have to keep in mind. We're trying to, the way I really liken this, so I have a marketing background. Before my life at Penn State, I was coming from industry. And I like to think of it as your billboard. And so when you're driving down the highway and you see the Pepsi billboard, I have to use Pepsi. I think I'm contractually obligated at Penn State to use Pepsi, right? So you're driving down the highway, you see the Pepsi billboard. They're not putting every single blessed thing on there about Pepsi, right? And why you should drink Pepsi. They're putting something like, really quick that's going to put the image in your head about, later when you're home about why you should crack open a Pepsi. And that's kind of the idea here. You're just trying to give them the image in their mind about why they want to learn more about you. And so what are the quick hit pieces? And that's why you got to do your research about who your audience is, so that you know the quick hit pieces about why they should bring you in to learn more. So another goal is to market those qualifications about what makes you a great fit for this organization and for this particular job. Obviously, to make yourself stand out. So what makes you well qualified? But are there some pieces that that make you also unique, a unique standout candidate? So think differently about your background. Maybe you're a unique candidate because, let's see here, you have a scientific background. Maybe you're applying to something in industry that isn't necessarily STEM, but you have a science background, and therefore you have an analytical way of thinking that would be really helpful in this particular position. That could make you a standout candidate. So think really about all that you bring to the table here. And then it is to show that you're a serious candidate. If you know how to put together a resume in a professional way, shows that you really put some thought into this and that you're ready to step into this very professional role. Okay, so next, differences. So the resume is considered, as I kind of hinted at, it's considered the summary of the relevant skills and experiences. And the CV is that more comprehensive statement of all of your educational and professional experiences. And so I'm going to skip down to the very last point because it's relevant. The resume is typically a one-page for recent students, for students and recent graduates. Even for, obviously it depends on where you are. This is not going to apply to all of you. I could easily see if you're pretty advanced in your, if you're a Ph.D. student and you're pretty advanced in your Ph.D. Career, I could easily see a 2 or 3 page resume. It could be possible. And so that's something that you have to really consider. A CV, again, typically for new PhDs, so we're talking pretty earlier in the career, it could already be 2 or 3 pages. Again, depending on publications you have and conferences you've attended and presentations you've done, that will depend. But there's really no set length with the CV. And so that's really one of the biggest differences. That thing just grows and grows and grows over the course of your career. When I was creating a relationship with a graduate school before I had this position and I was working in career services, I started to create a relationship with my now boss, Dr. Sarah Ades. And I was curious, and I said, because Dr. Sarah Ades was a faculty member at one point, I said, I'm curious, what does your CV look like? I've never really seen a CV. And she pulled this thing out, and it was, I'm thinking, all right, what, 10, 15 pages? She's been in the in the game for quite some time, and he's an experienced faculty member, et cetera. So I was thinking, what, 15 pages? And it was like it was a book, it was like 30, 40, I'm not even sure, it was huge. And so, even an experienced professional at her level in industry wouldn't have a resume like that, not even near. I mean, a few pages, that's it. You still have, only a few pages. So that's one of the biggest differences, is you still want to keep it very, very concise. Now, back to what I was saying about, even an advanced PhD student might have a 2 or 3 page resume. I still caution you, because let me explain to you why we want to keep this thing concise. First of all, remember what I was saying about, it is the billboard, it is the best pieces that you have to draw them in to give you an interview. If you think of, first of all, an industry that is not used to seeing a CV of 40 pages or even 10 pages, they're seeing, in some cases, hundreds and hundreds of resumes. They don't want to flip through, tons of pages of resumes to go through, a lot for a position, to bring in somebody for an interview. And so, that's the first thing. It can be pretty cumbersome. But also, when they're going through the process of reviewing resumes, even if it's just a few dozen, nobody is reading a resume. Nobody. Myself, even as a former career counselor, I know the value of a resume, et cetera. When I've been on committees, and I don't know if Lauren has had the same experience, but when I've been on committees, I'm not reading resumes. I'm scanning resumes. I'm looking for the pieces that I'm interested in and kind of scanning for the choice pieces. There are certain things that I know are in the job description, I know are important for the job, and I'm looking for those pieces. And so it doesn't really do you any good to have more pages, especially if those pages contain what I would call fluff, just having things on the resume to have them. And so, in other words, everything on that resume, no matter where I look as an employer, to contain quality pieces that are going to demonstrate your fit for that specific position. That's what you have to keep in mind. So if you are going to have 1, 2, 3 pages of your resume, make sure that it passes that test, that it really does, add to that narrative of why you're an excellent candidate for that job. And be careful of things that, for example, are maybe older things that repeat something, some, portion, maybe something about leadership that aren't as impressive, that you already have done something more recently that's much more impressive, that speaks to your leadership. That's not something you need to really keep on the resume, because it's just adding to the resume more pages. And it's not telling anybody anything new about your leadership skills, right? Because you already had something more recently that's even more impressive about your leadership skills. And don't forget, there's a cover letter. And so if you wanted to go into the depths and say, I've had years and years of leadership experience, you could say that in the cover letter. You don't need to have it on the resume to show a history of leadership. And then again, remember, this is to get the interview, and you can talk about leadership, your history of leadership. Okay, enough about that. So again, differences, hopefully you figured this out by now, but if a resume is more for that business, nonprofit, and industry job, and then the curriculum vitae is more the academia, fellowships and grants type of document. Now, I will also say that sometimes people will use the term CV interchangeably, especially those folks who are in a research position. Maybe they're in research, but they're in industry, and they'll say, send your CV in. They might not necessarily mean an actual CV. They just use that term. You can always clarify. You can always ask them, do you mean a true, a typical lengthy CV, or would you prefer more of a resume style? You can ask questions. There's nothing wrong with asking questions. That's completely fine. But they probably don't mean a 10-page CV, most likely if they're in an industry. And then as far as formats, I'm not going to go over all the differences between formats, but the format is all over the place with CV. There's 30 million formats you could probably have and what you could include and all this other business. But resumes are a little bit more boring. There's not many, you've probably seen all there is to see with resumes. That being said, you can certainly shift things around as you see fit and as it helps you in terms of getting your message across about who you are and what you want to get across about your background. Okay. You will also hear in terms of format and how you should put your resume together. How do I bold this? Do I put a line here? Do I have my name on the side? All these different things. And people will say, well, this is the right way to do it. And this is the right way to do it. And it comes down, it is a wholly subjective situation. There's no one right way to put together a resume. It is completely subjective. But there are some things that I like to go over about a resume that is important for you to keep in mind. So this first one, visually appealing. That's a very subjective thing. I usually like to say that for the most part, that is you. Is it visually appealing to you? When you look at it, the reason I say that is because you're going to be sending these resumes out to a whole bunch of people, and one employer is going to say this is visually appealing. One employer is going to say, well, I prefer it this way. Another person is going to say, well, I prefer it this way. You don't really know. Okay, so you can't get it right with everybody. And so for the most part, this is your document. You should be proud of it, and you should find it visually appealing. You should be proud of how you put this document together. That said, of course, there's nothing wrong with getting some feedback from professionals, obviously within the college, my office as well can give you some feedback. But at the end of the day, it's your document and it should be visually appealing. The rest of these things here will help you to make it more visually appealing as well. And so clear and consistent. And so, things should be clear. What is with what? Is this portion with this job, or is this portion with that job? And consistency can help with that as well. And so if I'm bolding the title of this job here, the next job should be bolded as well. It should have clear and consistent spacing. Those of us who go crazy when they see little spaces off here, or the alignment is off here, you know who you are in the audience. I'm the same way. The ones that go into a house and the picture on the wall is a little crooked, and you don't want to be rude, but you want to fix their picture. Yeah, I see you. I know who you are. That is very important. That can be really important. So make sure that everything is, the margins are consistent. The dates are consistent. If you're going to use abbreviations for August, AUG, then, abbreviate December too. Or if you're going to use the number 12 for December, use the number 8 for August. Just all of those things should be clear, consistent. And how you, if you're going to, put this in italics and put that in italics, et cetera, et cetera. So make sure those things are, because that is, again, what will make something visually appealing. Everything is organized. And so, again, that kind of goes with the clear and consistent as well. But organized can also talk about, how do you want to organize it? So I was talking a little bit about formatting and how it can be a little boring on it for a resume, but there's some strategy to formatting too. And so, company X is really going to be interested in your research experience. And so maybe you have instead of saying work experience, which is really boring, maybe you have a column called, or a section called research experience. And then another company is really interested in your teaching experience because they're interested in your communication skills. So maybe you have a teaching experience or communication experience section. And you've got that moved up higher this time, above the research experience section. So really make sure you're paying attention to that. It should also be results oriented. We're interested in things like, what did you accomplish? What were you able to do? Whether it's the research you were able to do and what you found out and what you were able to accomplish there, but also what you were able to skills you were able to develop too. Remember, soft skills are important. The communication skills you're able to develop, leadership skills, all of those things are very important too. And we're going to talk about those in a minute. Should be error-free. Now remember, our brains are not designed to pick up on our own errors. So make sure you have other people look at it. And then relevance is one of the most important things. Now, I found that if I'm applying to very similar jobs, it's a little easier to use the same resume for jobs. But you should always, every time you apply to a new job, I go through, I take the job description, highlight the words or underline or whatever the things that come up. If there are words that pop up again and again that are similar, that's something they're really interested in. And then I go back to my resume and say, okay, what do I need to do to make sure that this is really going to make sense to them? And, company A was interested in this, but this company is more interested in this. So I'm going to move this job up higher, or I'm going to move this bullet point up higher because it just makes more sense. So maybe it could just be some minor tweaking. You might not have to reinvent the wheel, but every single time, take a new look at that resume. Make sure it's relevant. All right, components on the resume. Objective has a question mark because I don't like them. Quite frankly, I'm one of those people that I just think they're a waste of space on the resume. And I would say particularly for you as graduate students, I don't think they help you. I think there are certain circumstances where they help. It's that thing on the top of the page that says, I'm looking for a position that will, in finance, that will blah, 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 blah. It doesn't help you. They're always optional though. I think the situations where they could be helpful is maybe if it's not clear why somebody with your degree would be applying to this job, and maybe you can help them connect the dots. But even in that situation, the cover letter can help you do that. And again, given the reason why I say especially graduate students is because you also probably have you have more things to talk about on the resume, and you just don't want to use that real estate to write an objective statement. You probably have a lot more that you want to talk about. So that's always, something that I don't recommend using. But if you ever have a question about that, please come and talk to me. Obviously, you're going to have your education. And unless you have a lengthy or, a good amount of full-time experience before you've gotten your education, usually your education is the first thing on your resume. Your experience is obviously very important. I hate the word activities, but, your maybe things you've done on campus, you've been involved in GPSA or BGSA or, organizations on campus, or you're volunteering or community engagement, that kind of thing. Or, other maybe professional organizations you've been a part of. If, we're not saying that research, like publications or presentations or conference, poster presentations, it's not to say those don't belong on the resume, because they absolutely could. It's just that most likely they would be like select publications as opposed to the CV, which would have like all of them. So that could be another component. Skills, and skills are more like a listing, so maybe language skills or computer programming skills or lab equipment that you're familiar with. It's a listing, but it's not things. I prefer not to see things like written communication, leadership, things like that, again, that we call soft skills. And the reason for that is because I feel like that is better in context. So write those things in your experience section, talking about how you developed written communication skills, or I developed interpersonal skills in this way, or verbal communication skills through this presentation I did. Because I think when you list it out in the skills section, it just doesn't have the same impact. Whereas I can just say, I speak French. And maybe I can say I speak French at a native capability, but I don't think you really need to go much further, right? Honors and awards, you can. But I don't know, I'm not as crazy about that either, unless it's like super relevant. I think that's more for, again, the CV where you're trying to demonstrate for a faculty position that you're able to get grants and bring in money and that sort of thing. But, again, it could. The components are, other than education and experience, I feel like that's kind of, very flexible. The educational elements. So when we're writing up your education section, which is crucial, it should be in reverse order. So if you're working on your Ph.D. right now, that would be the first one that we see on your resume, followed by your master's degree, followed by your bachelor's degree. You do not need to have your high school degree at all. And those of you who are working on your master's, would be master's and then your bachelor's degree. You'll have your institution and the city state. That's particularly important for Penn State because it also denotes your campus. So if you're University Park, you put University Park. If you're the Altoona campus, you put Altoona campus. You put Altoona, Pennsylvania. The degree should be written out fully, so we know what the degree is. You wouldn't just put civil engineering. You'd put Masters of Science in Civil Engineering, so I know it's Masters of Science. You can also include any certifications that you have. You're welcome to do that. You can include, I'm looking at the bottom corner there. If you want to include your thesis or dissertation title, if you want to include your advisor's name, you can. I would advise you that if the title is, again, relevant, if you're applying for a research position and it's relevant, that might be a good idea. If the advisor's name is known in the field, great. But in industry, so in a faculty position, if you're going for an academic position, that would certainly be something you do on a CV, because you're applying for positions, and the people you're applying with are, your advisor is most likely their peer, their colleague, right? In research in industry, that may not be the case. But if his or her research is known, you just have to kind of make a decision whether or not that's important, because again, real estate on your resume is crucial. So that's another one. And then your graduation date, so they know how far along in the program you are, like, if you're on track, etc. Now I know that gives some graduate students a little bit of anxiety. Just do the best you can, especially our PhD students. Just do the best you can. We're just trying to get an idea. Are you like at the very beginning, or, how far are you? And then of course, as graduate students, you don't have to put your GPA, your graduate students. We know you're doing all right. So that's really not something that's necessary. I'm moving right along here. I don't want, Lauren knows I can talk a blue streak, so I don't want to I don't want to run over anybody who has questions, but I want to keep going here and make sure we have some time. So please stop me if you have questions. This is just an example of something you could do that you might have on your resume here. So notice that for the PhD, this person did decide to have their advisor and dissertation. For whatever reason it was relevant, but for the master's, no, it's fine. And you'll notice that the way the language is phrased for the, I think, although I think it's on there. The pictures are covering it. I think I have for the PhD, it should say anticipated or something. Is that what it says, Lauren? Okay, I can't see it right now. So that's what you would just put. You'd put anticipated and then a certain date or expected or whatever, just so it's clear that you haven't actually received that degree yet. So that's an example. You don't have to, for example, one thing you could do is maybe the Penn State is above the degree. You could switch those if that's what you wanted to do. You could put Penn State in italics and the degree not. It's your choice how you want to kind of arrange this. So that is just simply an example. All right, and I already kind of mentioned this, but the essential content on a resume, I mean, really, when you really break it down, other than your contact information, hopefully that's obvious that your name has to be on this document, education and relevant experience. The rest of it that I have underneath here is really, again, it really depends on you, what you bring to the table and what they are looking for. And so there are a lot of things below here that could be optional content. And some of it could be essential. So it just depends on what the position is asking for and what you are going to bring. All right, so you may have heard of this transferable skills business and what it means. And so it just simply means you've developed it in one setting and it's used in a different setting. And your job as a graduate student is to make the connection easily apparent. And so one of the things that I found in working with graduate students is sometimes, especially those of you who have not worked for any stretch of time outside of academia. So maybe you went right from undergrad to grad, or maybe you did have some work experience, but not a whole lot, is that sometimes that is can be a challenge because you've been in academia. And so I'll give you a perfect example. I was working with a student not that long ago who was a PhD candidate who's just finishing up. And she wanted to work outside of academia. And she said, there's this really fantastic job that I want to apply for, but it's, one of the chief components is like excellent written communication skills. And I'm not really sure that I have that. And it was a phone appointment. And I just kind of like sat there for a minute. And I said, but you just wrote a dissertation. You have publications, and she kind of, even when I said that, she kind of pushed back a little bit. And she said, yeah, but that's not, that's different writing. That's not what they're asking for. That's not what the job is going to be. And you really have to change your mindset a little bit, because while it's definitely not writing a dissertation, it's not the same kind of writing. It is still written communication skills. And you might have to tweak your, how you do that skill a little bit for that job. But you can't honestly say you don't have written communication skills. And you certainly don't want to be so humble that you don't mention that to an employer and don't talk about that to an employer. Let them make the decision whether or not that's going to work. Don't say, well, that's not going to work for the job. I think the other important thing to talk about here is job descriptions and how they're written and how employers see them. When we write job descriptions, it's a wish list. And so there are essential things you have to be able to do, or essential qualifications you have to have. Like we absolutely need somebody have to have somebody with a master's degree. That's important. As a career counselor, we have to have somebody who has some understanding of how to work with students on, managing their career options, et cetera. Does somebody absolutely have to know how to use Nittany Lion Careers and how to manage notes in Nittany Lion Careers. We might put that in there, have familiarity with Nittany Lion Careers and how to manage notes. But would I hire somebody who doesn't have any clue about what Nittany Lion Careers is? Absolutely, if they had the other pieces. If they were great with students and had those other pieces, I would absolutely hire somebody. And so please keep that in mind, that when they write job descriptions, there are essential pieces, and usually they'll say that, must have, and other things like it would be great if, or, I'm trying to think of the language, I'm blanking right now, but, other things that would be nice to have. And, I had I'll be very honest with you, as I just got a job recently, as you know, when I was job hunting, I fell into this trap as well. And I had a very wonderful colleague of mine who was helping with the job search, because even people in the job search process, the career services realm need help sometimes. And so I had a colleague of mine, I was not going to apply to a certain job, and she said, why? Let them make the decision that you're not qualified. The worst that can happen is they say you're not qualified, we're not going to interview you. But make the case for yourself. And so I really encourage you to be very careful about disqualifying yourself before somebody else does. Think about all the things that you bring to the table. Okay, so I've got a question here from Caitlin. If you were a PhD candidate who earned an MA degree along the way, but will not ultimately graduate with a PhD, what is the most appropriate way to convey that status while applying to jobs? So in other words, Caitlin, if I'm understanding you correctly, you started on the track of your PhD, so you've earned some credits along the way to your PhD, but at some point you said, nope, that's not the right direction for me. You've got your master's degree, but PhD wasn't the right way for me, but I'm still applying for jobs, right? Be careful about that, because I ran into a similar situation one time where I started a master's degree and realized it wasn't for me, and it got misconstrued on my resume that even though I had anticipated, or that language. Oh, this is another question. Even though I had it clear on my resume, it got kind of confused. So make it very clear on your resume. If you want to put it on a resume, you don't have to put it on your resume at all, to be honest. But if you do want to include it on your resume, make sure it's very clear that you did not complete that degree. That's the first thing. However, and when you say convey that status, is that what you're talking about? Are you talking about specifically the resume or other parts? Can you maybe clarify that for me? And while you do that, I'm going to look at Sarah here.
I just allowed Caitlin, if you want to clarify, I just allowed you to talk within. So please feel free to unmute yourself and ask, clarify for Leslie your question. Or not, that's okay too. I know that it's very specific, so.
I guess in both resumes and cover letters, I was kind of thinking,
Yeah.
because so if I got a master's degree like as part of the program, like along the way,
Oh, I see.
there's been like, a year since then where I was like still in an assistantship and stuff. I didn't want to, omit, like have that, assistantship experience like kind of transcend the time where it was bounded for the master's, you know what I'm trying to say? And I didn't know if like there was a way that would be like more honest or appropriate to just make sure that that's clear, since otherwise it might look like there's a date discrepancy.
In other words, your master's was, you earned it in 2016, but then you had another year past that of your assistantship.
Yes.
Yeah, because that was for the PhD technically.
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, I mean, you don't have to have the PhD on your resume at all. That might be the most clear. And, because it was only a year, and it might be really confusing if you did have it on your resume.
Yeah, I wouldn't consider putting it under education at all. It was more just I was
Okay.
worried about it looking like there was some inaccuracy if the assistantship dates transcended like the period for the master's, since it was all
Yeah.
same program.
Yeah, and then what you could do, so if you have the master's on your resume, it ended at this date, and then under experience you have your assistantship going a year beyond that, and just let it lie. And then you could in your cover letter talk about the assistantship, being able to continue the assistantship beyond that time. I don't know that you need to, you had the opportunity to continue the assistantship beyond that time. If you could in the cover letter talk about, something along the lines of having the opportunity to continue the assistantship beyond that time, as I considered whether or not to, go for my PhD. Something along those lines. That might make it sound a little bit, more positive, I guess, in a way. Yeah, something along those lines. I think I would probably address it in the cover letter and just say something like that, as I considered whether or not.
Cool. Sorry, I just want to make sure it wasn't like an omission that would be bad,
No, I don't think so. And I don't know that industry really even understands how that works.
Okay, cool.
So, yeah, academia might be like, what? But even then, you just put it in your cover letter. I think it's fine.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. And then I had another question from.
We have a couple questions, Leslie. Yeah.
Okay. Go ahead, Lauren.
I was going to say, do you mind if we take the one in the Q&A, because it's kind of relevant to the cover letter first? So how essential is it to include a cover letter? I realize that some places don't have a place to upload it, or it's optional. Should I try to combine cover letter and resume in the same file and upload it?
I'll tell you what, and because we're running out of time here, so that's a great question. I honestly feel like a cover letter is incredibly important. And the reason I feel like it is important is because it is the only place for you to really convey your enthusiasm and excitement for a job. There is no place to do that on a resume. It is just, here are my skills. Here is why I'm qualified. And anybody who has ever been on a search committee for a job knows how important that is. Anybody who has ever been a supervisor for a job knows how important it is to have people on your team who actually want to be there and like doing what they're doing. And that is an incredibly important thing to see in a candidate. I would have 10 people on my team who are like sort of qualified, who I can train, but want to be there, rather than one person who's super qualified. And I can almost guarantee you that other people would feel the same, other employers would feel the same. And so it's incredibly important, whether it's optional. I mean, if it's required, then it's required. But if it's optional, take the option. And what was the part about how to
yeah, so should I try to combine the cover letter and the resume into the same file and upload it?
Meaning if it's like not talked about, like if it's not an option, it's not required, it's just they don't even say anything.
Yeah,
I guess. Yeah, I guess you could as like kind of a cover page. I don't know, like almost, I mean, if you really wanted to, I mean, you could say, please see my resume attached, and like kind of do like a little mini cover letter, I guess, kind of a thing. You could do that. I guess I would be careful. I think it would depend on how it's how the, I don't know, uploading is structured or whatever. But one thing that you could also do, if it's like an emailed thing, you could kind of put your email as the cover letter. I wouldn't make it too long, but you could kind of use your email as the cover letter and my resume is attached type of thing. That's another way to do it. But I would always, always, always take an option to write a cover letter. You will find employers and other people who say cover letters are stupid, I never read them. Okay, fine, whatever. But then fine, they're not going to read it. But I can find you 10, for every person that says that, I'll find you 10 employers that will say it is important. And and it's not just because I'm in career services. When I was a employer, before I came to campus as a career services person, I was an employer. And when I was hiring people, I would always read a cover letter first before I looked at their resume. That was the thing I looked at first to see if they wanted the job. And then I would look at their resume to see if they're qualified. So I don't know. I'm pro cover letter. I hate writing them, by the way. I hate writing them. So I'm anti cover letter when I'm the candidate, if that makes you feel any better, but they're important. So I know we're out of time, and I really want to be respectful of time. And I'm so glad that people had questions. I think that's more important. But I do want to give you some information about what I do really quickly. So on the left-hand side there, I am actually doing office hours this semester. And so if you go to that QR code, you'll be able to sign up for my Thursday office hours. And that's something where you can do either virtual or in person. And I can answer all your questions. I'm sorry I didn't get to some of your questions. I apologize. But I can answer all of your questions about your specific, anything, resumes or anything. And on the right-hand side, you saw this little A2I symbol as we went through. This is a program that we brought to the graduate school. It's Accelerate to Industry. And one of these programs that we run is the Job Search Strategies program. And it is going to be happening starting February. And it's a whole series of programs, virtual programs, where we do career exploration, resumes, interviewing, all these things that you need to know as a job seeker. And you can register for that suite of programs with that QR code on the right. So it's a suite of 6 programs on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons, late afternoon. So it's a really great suite of programs. If you are late in your career, like within 1 year of graduation as a master's student, or late, like within 2 years of graduation as a PhD student, we also have a fantastic program coming up at the end of the school year in May called Immersion Week. It's A2I Immersion Week. So keep your eyes on our website for that, because that's going to be a fantastic program that we bring in employers and alumni, and it's a whole week of fantastic programming and dinners and lunches, et cetera, for students who are thinking about going into industry. So I want to be respectful of time. I know you have a busy day, Lauren, so I don't want to keep anybody else.
No worries. And it looked like we had somebody put in the Q&A that the left QR code was the same as the right and didn't bring up the office hours. But that's okay. I put both of those links in the chat for everybody, so they are located there. You can also find the office hours. It is linked on the right QR code. I've worked with Leslie for a while, I feel like, in different capacities, and I highly, highly, highly recommend everybody on this call to go to her office hours, talk with her about specific questions. She's an excellent person to have in your corner as a career counselor and as the associate director over there in the Graduate Student Career and Professional Development Center. So thank you so much, Leslie, for your time. I really appreciate all of your knowledge as always. This has been wonderful.
Thanks all.
Great. Have a good rest of your day, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.